Well, thank you very much for having me. I am the Australian that works in New Zealand, and I must apologise, I do have a New Zealand accent. And I probably have the most New Zealand accent out of the three of us that are here. I did have to change my Australian accent because my students and husband couldn't understand me. My students can now understand me, but my husband says he can't, but I think that's a completely different matter. So, veterinary emergency response. I'm talking about this from an Australasian perspective, but it's probably more of a New Zealand perspective because this is what we're doing at the moment. So, it's a very small industry, and I was talking to Ian one day because he was a colleague at Massey University, and we were discussing New Zealand's ability to respond to disasters because, as you know, we shake, rattle and roll and do lots of other different things and explode. So we probably needed to be prepared. So looking at, researching that area, we found that we had absolutely nothing. It's a bit of an ad hoc approach to it. So we wanted to have a nice coordinated response. So it's also my research area, so it was quite nice to be able to bring it all together. I've always had an interest in emergency and critical care, and as a kid I always wanted to be an SES member, so I wanted to run around in your little orange uniforms, but never got to do that. So now I run around in a blue uniform, so I'm feeling like I'm a bit of a part. Got to do what I wanted to. So why are veterinary emergency response teams important? Initially we thought, oh no, we just need vets and vet techs, but we soon realised very quickly that we needed to have a group of different people with different types of skills. But because we have the veterinarians on board, we were able to use that protected name, and it got us into places that we possibly weren't able to get into earlier. So the team has a lot of training. We have training in disaster management. We also do technical animal rescue. So we are there's two teams in New Zealand that do small animal rescue, and there is one team, which is ourselves, that do large animal rescue as well. So we will rappel down gorges and rescue dogs that are sticking on the side of a gorge, or we can rescue horses as well. We can do field triage, decontamination, and on top of all that we've got the skills to do any sort of immediate veterinary care. And it's really different type of care. I love working in emergency and critical care. You've got all the toys to play with, but there's nothing like doing a little bit of emergency management out of the back seat of a car with lots of things happening around you. We use the same skills, but we have very, very limited resources to do it, but we certainly can do a lot with the skills and knowledge we have. What we can bring with us is that we've got knowledge and skills in different areas. We do have a very good understanding of your incident command system, and we do work with USAR in New Zealand, so fire service. So we are able to have some of those really good relationships as well. We have some specialist equipment. We're fortunate on our team that we have a specialist equine surgeon, just in case we need it. We have a specialist small animal surgeon, and we have an animal behaviourist. I guess that's the uniqueness of being able to work from a university. We've got some nice specialists in there. We, as a team, I know a lot of people have said that vets don't particularly work well in teams, but we as a team work quite well. And I can say it's probably, from our Christchurch deployment, was probably one of the most fulfilling things I have done as a team. They were our lifeline. If they didn't watch our backs, we could have possibly been quite severely injured. So it was a really good team. We know how each other works. We know what everyone's strengths and weaknesses are, so we work quite well. And we do communicate with other groups as well. We also know how to handle animals particularly well. So from a Massey University perspective, we are faculty from the university, particularly from the vet school, and really the only reason why we're all from Massey University is from an insurance point of view. So we come under the university's insurance for indemnity insurance, any sort of accident insurance as well. But also because we are in one town that we can work quite well and train together when we're needed. So what sort of roles that we do and we have trained for? So we do disaster assessments. looking at animal welfare, and there are a couple of groups that we work together to do that, and we feed this information back to a national level. But one of our other things that we think is important is to look at veterinary infrastructure. So from Christchurch point of view, there was quite a few clinics that were really severely affected. So we needed to make sure that we knew who was running, what sort of resources they needed, and could we connect them up with other resources and people to be able to ensure that there is veterinary services available to the community. We do, as I said, technical animal rescue. So this is one of our vets that's hanging off the side of a gorge, and we're simulating a rescue. So we do use real live animals, and it's usually ours, that we stick up on in harnesses and hang them off cliffs. And I've got a standard poodle, and he just hangs there. He's doesn't care. He looks up at you and is like, oh, you're with me. I'm near people. So he loves, I'm not sure if he loves hanging off a cliff, but he seems to like being near us. So he's used for teaching a lot. But we also do trees. There's a lot of cats up in trees. In the past, fire service has got fire hoses and squirted them off the trees. That doesn't work particularly well. The ladders don't work particularly well either. So we have a technique of being able to have a nice system going up a tree and removing animals from trees. We have slack and swiftwater rescue, and quite honestly, we will probably not rescue an animal from slack or swiftwater. It was really just to protect ourselves. So if we got ourselves in that situation, we knew how to look after each other and we knew how to get out of that. We did the initial training with Ian's group. I managed to get the Whisper group over for their training. It was a little unfortunate that it was in June, so it was winter, and we did our swiftwater training in a glacial river. So I've never seen so many South American people that have turned a nice tinge of blue after a wee swim in the river. We do confined space, so we have USAR Cat 1A for one of our qualifications that we have. So that allows us to get into a red zone, and that is really, really important. And what's been discussed earlier on is that if you don't have those qualifications to get in there, you're not going to get in there. And you've got to have them. You need to show that you are safe and that you're able to look after each other as well. So, and the reality really hits you when you go to a building, you have your ID on you, you need to take your ID off you, leave it outside in case something happens. And I think we don't think about that until we actually do it. So we are able to go into collapsed buildings. Now there are 2 teams in New Zealand. The other team don't have vets, so they're not as precious as our team, as in, feeling precious about themselves. I'm talking about the veterinarians here. So they will actually go into the building before we will. We're quite happy to stand outside the building and just say, hand it to us. But if we need to, we can actually go into a building. And from the Christchurch perspective, that's something that really helped us. If we didn't have that, there is no way we could get through cordons to get in there and do the work we did. From a disaster point of view, your first priority is always going to be rescue. So our first priority in Christchurch or in any response are the urban search and rescue dogs, the police dogs, any sort of bomb squad dogs, cadaver dogs, any working animal is our first priority. We need to ensure that those teams are fit and able to work well, and then we go on to looking at companion animals. In Christchurch, we're a small team, and so we spent most of our time in the red zone looking after USAR and police dogs. We can treat patients medically, we can do field hospitals, so we did assess in Christchurch if we required field hospitals. We've got the equipment to set it up and get people, the local community, to fulfil those needs. We always say that it's the local community that needs to have that response. They need to feel like they're being responsible and contributing back to their recovery. Decontamination, which is an area which is not done particularly well. Certainly Christchurch, I don't think most people had actually ever heard of liquefaction before Christchurch occurred. We're finding that there has been significant issues with animals being in that liquefaction. So decontamination is extremely important. Animal identification, so if an animal has died, or being able to identify diseases that could potentially be zoonotic and infectious. And advice. we like to talk. We all like to talk. So the credentials that our team has, or I think any veterinary emergency response team needs to, is all the things that we've come across here. The one on the bottom is FEC. You know, we have all these acronyms, but this is pre-hospital emergency care. So there are several team members that have FEC training, so we can go in and do human first aid if required. And we did have that in Christchurch. Again, we were told initially that there was no animal welfare requirements, which we all knew was wrong. And we were also told that we needed to be careful whenever we went around to do doing our assessments, because there may have been areas that hadn't seen any humanitarian people go. And you know, we are in New Zealand, we are a developed country. We did come across that. But like Ian said, the people were so happy that we were there to look after members of their family. But we were also there, we came across a gentleman that was living behind a veterinary clinic, which we thought was actually a member of the vet clinic. He wasn't. He was a 90-year-old man who had not seen, we were at day 12 after the event, he had not seen anyone, and so he had no power, no food, no water, no toilets. He had a colostomy bag which he couldn't get. He had to walk down the road to go to a portable loo, and he couldn't empty his colostomy bag into the portable loo, so he was feeling very ashamed, walking down the road with a bucket of his contents or his colostomy bag. But he had run out of a lot of equipment, and he wasn't able to actually cart water particularly well either, so he was quite dehydrated. So we were able to bring the Red Cross into that and bring some help to him. So, you know, we're prepared for human requirements, but also for animal requirements. So it's quite nice to be able to bring the animal component into helping people. You can see we do lots of different things. Also the main thing that we do too is media liaison, and I'm sure you've all had that sort of training, but I think it's really important that we continue with that training to make sure that we're getting the right message across. We also need to have an understanding of how animals are affected by disasters, and of course in New Zealand we pretty much have all of them. So we're quite well versed in some. Well, we think we are quite well versed in it. Floods, fires. There are quite a few different things of how animals are affected, but we're finding out more and more that these tend to be the short-term effects. And we are looking at medium to long-term effects, and I'll talk about that a little bit later because one of our roles is looking into research too. So earthquakes and landslides, volcanic eruptions. So this year in New Zealand we've had several major earthquakes, we've had several major volcanic eruptions, we've had a lot of flooding, a lot of snow events, and the other thing which I don't have up here is toxic substances. So we had quite a major diesel spill in our ski fields which went into the water, and so we advise on those sorts of things as well. Offering contaminated water to animals, which people don't tend to think about, and lighting a match was not a particularly good thing to do either. So research, we're academics by trade, but for the university to support us, we need to show that we are bringing some sort of research outputs from it, which was quite good from a New Zealand point of view, because from the Christchurch point of view, we went down armed thinking about data that we could collect while we were down there. So all the urban search and rescue dogs from previous events, particularly the World Trade Centre, we went and took blood samples from all the USAR and police dogs to see if they were being exposed to any chemicals, any lead, or we took fibres of their hair to see if there is any asbestos exposure. Now we contacted the health board to see what sort of samples they were taking from the human rescuers, and we found out that we were actually doing more than what they were doing for people, because they were doing nothing for people. So we've got some really good data there to show the effects of these dogs working really, really hard for an extended period of time. And so from our point of view too, being able to be there and apply what we research is really important. So, you know, working with the dogs, we could see how they worked, because usually we just see it from videos. We could actually watch the work that they were doing. We could palpate the dogs. And I have an interest in rehabilitation and physical therapy. And so I felt the dogs were really, really tight. We took some blood from them. We looked at CK levels, so that's just a level to show if there's any sort of muscle injury. And quite a few of those dogs had quite high CK levels. So it's thinking about, you know, they don't look too dehydrated, but they were particularly dehydrated. The high CK levels showed that we needed to rehydrate them a lot better. What we were told by, you know, people around that really don't understand these dogs' drive to work really hard is that they're not going to consume enough water to sustain themselves. So we need to do some preventative work there. So we're doing IV or subcut fluids during that time to pick them up a little bit. But the other thing which I'm doing at the moment was a study of morbidity and mortality from companion animals to look across all animals. But what we're seeing is over from a 2-year period after the Christchurch events, because it wasn't one quake, there was 4 significant earthquakes during that time, is that we're seeing spikes in animals presenting with renal disease, with gastrointestinal disease, and other things, these are the only 2 that we looked at, but also death was another one. And there was huge spikes in death around the time that the the Earthquake Commission sent out letters to say to people, well, you need to move out of your home now to get your home fixed. And there is no rental accommodation in Christchurch that's allowing people to take their pets with them. So people are in a bit of a dilemma, and there are like families of animals that are being euthanized. Now the flow-on effect from that is that people, you have their animals to cope, but also it's not just the owners, but we are starting to see some post-traumatic stress in the vets and the vet nurses that are having to do all that euthanasia as well. So we are, you know, even though we do this response, we feel responsible to make sure that we're doing the research at the same time and able to publicise that just so it can help with further response in developing any sort of legislation around it. For the police, we are working with them certainly from a preventative point of view, and in my area, looking at core strengthening for these animals to ensure that they can work better and not have sustained so many injuries. So this is, we were deployed to Christchurch and we pushed and pushed and pushed to be deployed. And it wasn't until day 5 that we got into Christchurch. Now we should have been there as soon as the dogs were deployed, but we weren't. So it was day 5 by the time we got there. And I've just put a video montage of what we saw, what other people saw, just to give you an appreciation of what it looked like, because I don't think you could really appreciate it unless you were there, but this is just a quick video of what was there. And quite honestly, the way that we described it was like going into a war zone. And I can say we finished our qualification for VERT 2 days before the earthquake happened. So it was a bit fortuitous, really. So with an event like that, you have a multitude of things going on. You've got flooding, you've got collapsed buildings, you've got fire, you've got liquefaction, which is mud as well. And so you've got so many things going on that unfortunately you're unable to do everything at once. But that's where your communication and coordination with groups is really, really important. So we have a fantastic relationship now with USAR because they saw what we were doing with their dogs. It wasn't the handlers that actually had the epiphany, it was the guys up the top from USAR that could see that actually their dogs are team members. So when we go into buildings now, if there is a victim in the building and the animal is in an area that's collapsed and the animal and the search dog is stuck, we will go and rescue that search dog first before we'll get the victim, okay, because they're team members. So it's been a complete change from looking at the dogs as rather than a piece of equipment or a tool, they are a team member. And so that's been a fantastic change of events for them. Because that now means that whenever USAR dogs are deployed nationally or internationally, the VERT team will be deployed with them. So they've got that help. I've run 2 minutes, so I'll quickly go through this. So we did mostly disaster assessment of the dogs. There were dogs from New Zealand, Australia, Singapore and Japan in there. So we not only had to look after different animals or different types of teams, but we had biosecurity issues, so we weren't allowed to look at one group of dogs and then go straight to the other group of dogs. They weren't allowed to mix together, but also sometimes there was a bit of a language barrier. Fortunately, one of our team members is super good at karate and was able to speak Japanese to the Japanese team. But also the Japanese team didn't understand, all the teams didn't have any, none of them had vets, and the Japanese team were concerned about us giving any injections to the dogs. So we had to think about ways of being able to treat their dogs orally. So there was just a few things that we had to work around. And police dogs are an interesting group of dogs to work with. Let's just say that you shoot things at them rather than being near them and run away. The other thing, that was a really good decontamination unit for people, but there was nothing set up for the dogs. So they had set things up for the dogs, but it was only for their feet. And if you looked at the things that they were going through in the small areas, there was lots of stuff. There was bodily fluids, there was a food that had was decomposing, and there's things like battery acid that these dogs are going through. And I'm amazed at the lack of injuries that they actually had. But they weren't being decontaminated, so we organised for a hydrobath to come in and for all the dogs to be decontaminated. Also was deployed to Thailand floods, so we also have an international capacity to deploy. So we work as a surge capacity for NGOs, and we work closely with Whisper as well for that if required, if they need extra help. So these are just some of the environments that we worked in. Came across diseases that I'd never seen in my life before and learnt to work with those. We do have this in Australia, in Northern Territory, if anyone's from there, so, but it's quite treatable. And unfortunately, this dog is now in America. So she was treated and sent to America for a nice family. So that was within 2 weeks of receiving treatment. So the projects that we are doing are technical large animal rescue. So we brought Marianne over because there hadn't been any training in New Zealand at all, and we are planning to continue to train a lot of fireys and other groups. Fundraising, we all know that money is an issue, so we are starting to work with other rescue teams. So instead of us having to have all the equipment, we are now actually working with rescue teams that can set up a system, and then we just work as the paramedic, go over the edge, and then they bring us back up rather than having to bring all the equipment and set the systems up. We are working with USAR to train up their paramedics, so each team has a paramedic that can do animal first aid or at a paramedic's level. So we are teaching them at the moment how to do IVs, intubate, and do some basic things with their animals. And just continue to work with USAR continue to work with vets in this area, and also serving our community on educating them for animal welfare and disasters. So we do quite a few different things in that area. Has anyone got any questions? No? Apologies for some of the pictures as well, but it sort of paints a picture for you.